Hello everyone and welcome to the discussion on Kubla Khan. Now in the last discussion we talked about the poetic theories of Wordsworth and Coleridge as well as the literary and ideological context of Romanticism. Now what we have discussed in the previous lecture that according to Coleridge, the two types of imagination, that is, primary and secondary imagination. Now, primary imagination, it provides a shape to the existing world according to a particular order, and secondary imagination not only shapes the existing world but at the same time created a new world which is beyond the known and familiar world. And again, this when he talks about the difference between fancy and imagination in his Biography Literaria, chapter 13, Coleridge states that fancy is a crude and twisted form of reality. That is, it is about the technicalities. For example, if in poetry, if we consider the role of fancy, it implies the technicalities and also the poetic devices which the poet uses. Now, what to use in poetry that belongs to the domain of fancy? Now, but the synchronization of all these elements into an organic whole requires secondary imagination. So, Coleridge attributed poetic creation primarily to the secondary imagination, something which dissolves, diffuses in order to recreate. That is what Coleridge has stated in Biography Literaria, chapter 13. Now, when we come to Kubla Khan, now primarily when we look at the poem, it seems to be an enigmatic, a quote-unquote difficult and complex poem, because apparently if you look at the poem, you find the poem a little bit strange, and something it provides images and talks about things which is not easy for us to imagine. So therefore, this poetic composition of Kubla Khan that appears to be a puzzle, perhaps, which is left by Coleridge to solve. Now, in the Coleridge, he wrote a preface to the poem, and in that preface, Coleridge explains the context or the background of the composition of this particular poem. According to the poet, as himself stated in the preface, that in the summer 1797, the author was not in good health. So therefore, he resorted to, he rested, he went for a temporary repose in a lonely farmhouse uh, between Somerset and Porlock. Now, since he was not well, some anodyne was prescribed, some medicine was prescribed, and this medicine actually caused a slumber, a state of sort of semi consciousness. Something he has fallen asleep as if, but in a state of semi consciousness or slumber. And in that, when he fell asleep, he was reading the book Parcus's Pilgrimage, as he himself has stated. And in that particular book, there is a line. And the line reads as, "Here the Khan Kubla commanded a palace to be built, and a stately garden thereunto, and thus 10 miles of fertile ground were enclosed with a wall." So, when he was reading this particular sentence, he fell asleep, and in that particular sleep, he had, in his sleep, he had a dream, and in that dream, he had a vision. Now, when he woke up, he started charting those images in the form of a poetic composition. But as he completes the first part of the poem, he was interrupted by a stranger. And for some time he had to suspend his writing, stop his writing for a few hours, in order to talk about this stranger who came upon an urgent business. Now, when he returned after finishing the conversation, and started writing the remaining part of his vision, he found that most of the remaining part he has already forgotten. And he only was able to write a few fragmented part of the poem. And therefore, he subtitled the poem as Kubla Khan, a vision in a dream, a fragment. So when this Kubla Khan was published, in the critical and academic waters, that is to the critics, it appeared as an enigma, a puzzle. The critics, they were baffled. They were really sort of in a dilemma regarding the categorization of the poem. And the question which readily comes to our mind when we read Kubla Khan, the primary question that we encounter is that, is it a fragment, as the poet himself has stated in the preface, or is it a complete poem? And this particular statement or the story about this fragmented composition is only a puzzle which is designed and devised by the poet in order to baffle, in order to confuse his readers? So that is the primary question we encounter when we read Coleridge's Kubla Khan. Now, before we go into that particular question, let us look at what exactly he has tried to say. Now, what I would like to suggest, that instead of connecting each and every image of the poem, instead of interpreting each and every image of the poem, it would be better to look at the poem as a whole. So what is required? We need to have an overview or a holistic reading of the poem in order to find, quote unquote, a meaning out of it, to get a meaning out of it. So let us first look at what actually he has written. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So first of all, in Xanadu did Kubla Khan, and the poet himself has stated in the reference that this Xanadu and this name Kubla Khan that appeared in Parcus's pilgrimage, which he was reading when he had that particular vision, which is actually the sort of inspiration behind this poem. So in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. So first of all, Kubla Khan, he is a medieval Chinese emperor, the first important Chinese emperor who was renowned for his skills in war and at the same time for his ambitious projects. For example, as we get from history, that Kubla Khan was the first emperor who introduced paper currency, which we actually use, the whole world use nowadays. This paper currency was introduced by the Chinese emperor Kubla Khan. So that was a very ambitious project. So Kubla Khan was actually known for such adventurous and ambitious project. So we can say that the poet's choice of Kubla Khan, whichever he might have stated in the preface, but when we look at this particular enterprise, the very sort of difficult and ambitious project that Kubla Khan has commenced, that is building up a pleasure dome. That is, pleasure dome itself, the idea itself, we have to remember, is not a concrete idea. Pleasure is an abstraction. Pleasure is an abstraction. I'll come to the questions. Paper currency means the notes, the paper notes that we use. কাগজের টাকা, ঠিক আছে, আমরা সবাই ব্যবহার করি তো কাগজের টাকা এই সময়, but it was actually introduced by Kubla Khan first. If you just find the search in history, you may Google it, you'll find that the paper currency was actually first introduced by Kubla Khan. So that was a very ambitious project at that particular time in the medieval age. So what I'm trying to say, that Kubla Khan, this name, that why did the poet choose Kubla Khan? The first question is that Kubla Khan, the great emperor, renowned and very famous in 19th century Europe for his ambitious projects, number one. And number two, that this particular reference to the techniques, reference to this Oriental king, an Asian king, an Asian medieval king, that was one of the strategies of 18th and 19th century poets and the literary personalities, because such names are associated with, because if you remember Edward Said's theorization of Orient in his book Orientalism, then this Orient appears to be a place of romance which is renowned for exoticism and associated with mystery and magic. So the moment you refer to an Oriental king, it brings to our mind this very associations of magic, mystery and wonder. So this reference to Kubla Khan, first it creates a sort of magical effect, and it creates a sort of, it actually we can say it actually sort of what should I say, it excites our imagination, because whenever we get that name, for example the name Arabian Nights, or say the Indian yogi, so these names to the 18th and 19th century Europeans, it excites their imagination, and something that which actually sort of transports them to a world of mystery, magic. So what Coleridge is deliberately trying to do is to create a world of make-believe, to create a world of magic where everything is possible. And so the name Kubla Khan appears to be appropriate, appears to be perfect for creating this effect. Because if we look at Coleridge's poems, for example, his other poems like A Rhyme of an Ancient Mariner, Christabel, Kubla Khan, what was really important, because Coleridge, he always he talks about this purpose of supernaturalism, that it should create, it should induce a willing suspension of disbelief which constitutes poetic faith. So it means that it compels the reader, when you read a supernatural story, a gothic story or a horror story, if it's a good horror story, then you are compelled to believe in whatever the author says for this moment. Otherwise, you know that it cannot be possible. The ghosts do not exist. But what is important, that for the time being you trust the narrator, you trust the version of the poet. So that is why it is very important, first of all, to create the effect. Like in films, they use the special effect. So in camera, we use different filters, different effects to provide it a more credible and realistic shape, to increase its charm. So similarly, in this supernatural literature, supernatural stories or the supernatural poems, it is important to create an atmosphere which would, on the one hand, enhance the charm of the text, and on the other hand, it would excite the imagination of the reader, and it would compel the reader to sit and believe whatever has been conveyed to him. Right? So that is why the name Kubla Khan and Xanadu. So in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. So first of all, stately pleasure dome. A dome that is a sort of, a kind of architectural shape like this dome. But what is important, a stately dome, that is not something unrealistic. You have seen many of such domes in palaces, in different other mosques, temples, other buildings. You find this particular shape. But what is really makes us baffled, that it is a pleasure dome. A dome which is made of pleasure. So pleasure dome. So Kubla Khan, the king of Xanadu, we have to remember that the Kubla Khan, who is the actual historical medieval king, and the Kubla Khan who is referred in this poem, they are two different persons. This Kubla Khan that Coleridge has mentioned here as the creator of, as the executor of this ambitious project, is not the historical Kubla Khan. But Kubla Khan here stands for the creator. And what he has done? He is the king of Xanadu, and he has issued a decree. What is a decree? A decree is a royal order. An order, a royal resolution, and issuing an order that, well, this has to be done. So he has issued an order, a decree, to construct a dome, stately dome. But what is baffling? That this dome is a pleasure dome. So how could this be possible? Now here, then, Coleridge has given a description of the place where this dome is to be constructed. How is the place? Where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So Alph, the sacred river. So first of all, this word sacred. So what is the importance of Alph? It is a sacred river. So this very religious or theological significance of this particular river is unmistakable. It's a sacred river. So why sacred? So is Coleridge trying to sort of make it a religious enterprise because he's referring to sacredness? So we have to look at it. So where Alf, the sacred river, runs through caverns measureless to man, through caves, caverns, measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So where is the place? Where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. Tahole, first of all, measuredless, that is immeasurable, something which is beyond measurement. And when we say that something is immeasurable, that means we cannot perceive it by our five senses. So it is not something which is like something very common or familiar thing that we come across in our daily life. But this is something which is measuredless, which cannot be measured. So it is deep and profound. Now, is it the literal depth? Literally depth. Or it is something which is talking about the psychological depth, that is, the human capacity to measure. This we have to understand. So where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So sunless, the sea is so deep that sunlight could not reach its bottom. Sea is not something, the bottom of the sea has always been hailed as a domain of mystery. We cannot really understand what is there. We are yet to know what exactly are there at the bottom of the sea. So down to a sunless sea. Sunless means lifeless. Something which is dark. Something which we cannot measure. Something like dark, immeasurable, impenetrable place. Something perhaps which is beyond the human power, beyond the human capacity to perceive, to reach, to trade, and to measure. So that is what Coleridge is trying to say. We have to remember these lines, these two expressions, measuredless and sunless. We have to remember, keep in mind these two words. I'd ask you to keep in mind these two words. So twice miles of fertile ground, twice 5 miles, 10 miles of radius. Twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous reels, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So on the one hand, it's a place this place is something like this place, when we look at the description, when we read the description, what comes to our mind is that this is an exotic place. The place which we come across in our legendary tales, medieval romances, and also in our Oriental travelogues and travel narratives. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground. The word fertile has to be kept in mind. So something which is apt for creation. Fertile means something which is good for, when we say that this ground is fertile, then it's good for agricultural production. So it seems that this ground is fertile. That is something, this particular ground, this place is appropriate, fit for creation. Creation of life. Creation of something new. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round. So first of all, there is a girdled. The whole place is surrounded, girdled with walls and towers. So in this particular fertile field, Kubla Khan has constructed or ordered to construct a pleasure dome, and this place is girded, surrounded with the walls and towers, where blossom, and there were gardens bright with sinuous reels, the small rivers, sinuous reels, the very sort of serpentine small rivulets, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. Incense-bearing tree, say for example, if when someone tells it to us that incense-bearing tree, we remember sandal. But to the European imagination, it's something which is very strange and magical. Incense-bearing tree. And here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So this place, how is the place? Let us summarize. Place is, number 1, fertile. So fit for procreation, fit for production. And this place is secondly girded with walls and towers. There were gardens where blossomed incense-bearing tree, that is fragrant tree, and forests ancient as the hills. And this place is also an ancient place. So it might have a suggestion, might have associations with ancient wisdom, or we might, it would not be far-fetched to talk about occult magic in this particular context. And there were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So enfolding, it has, this place is semi-dark, and there are certain sunny spots of greenery. So as a whole, it is something that the urban British reader is not very familiar with. Rather, something which appears to be like a distant image to him. Now, coming to the second stanza. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover. Now, deep romantic chasm. Chasm, that's like a crack. Now, what kind of chasm? That's a romantic chasm. So, what is it? An inspiration. Why is that chasm called a romantic chasm? We need to look at it. So I end up my discussion today here, and in the next class we shall be discussing the remaining parts. Thank you so much.